right, it's morning huddle time. Good morning.
No,
I'm not saying it works.
I wish you
I'm just saying
Godspeed.
it happens.
I Godspeed with all of that. I think that's really, really nice. I'm not sure what kind of success you're going to have with that today, because the world, my friend, has changed.
Right.
Latin American construction workers, they have different needs. They have completely different needs.
These awards have a huge criteria that you have to fill out, and they usually have a community service or community relations portion.
Makes them, the most productive with a high performance value, and sometimes it's 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
Funny, isn't it? Yeah, not for me.
Not for me.
At 11 o'clock, I am guaranteed to be snoring. So. Good morning. It is morning huddle time, and I'm Chad Prinky, alongside my co-host and producer, as always, Stacy Holzinger. Stacy, how are you this sunny day?
It's amazing out here. I'm trying not to rub it in, but
but it is just the tail end of winter, just the beginning of spring, and you appear to be somewhere where short sleeves are very much called for.
I am in Riverview, Florida for the week, meeting a couple clients. So it's beautiful here. I got sunburned real bad on the boat the other day, but whatever.
So you've finally found a way to combine business and pleasure.
Finally, it took me 2.5 years, but
well done, Stacy. You've made it. You've done, and write me a quick manual on that. I'll look forward to. And we have with us this morning Darren Young, who is decidedly not in a sunny spot. Darren, thank you so much for joining us. And where are you this very, very dark morning?
I'm up in the Pacific Northwest, Everett, Washington, just north of Seattle. I bounced around between Tacoma, which is south of Seattle, and Everett, north of Seattle. So our shop is up north, and my main office is a little satellite office south, a little bit closer to home.
That is quite literally the exact opposite of Florida.
yes.
Florida can be wet. It's
yeah.
What do I want to do this morning?
I just mean the as far as the continental United States goes, it is diagonally opposed. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Darren. Darren is he's in charge of digital transformation at UMC. UMC is a builder in the Pacific Northwest. He's the director of construction technology, that is, and I'll let Darren provide more background on sort of who he is and how he got to where he is. It's a various and sorted background. So Darren, I'd love to have you walk through that for some context for our audience.
Sure. Well, initially I went to school being an electrician, and through a series of strategic missteps and mistakes, ended up in manufacturing. Spent a number of time there, and I kind of just, as the manufacturer was getting into CAD and CNC machining, I was just kind of there when they picked up on that, and it's like, hey, this is cool. This is going to get me out of here someday. So I've always worked for manufacturers. About 2008, I switched to construction. That said, I've always worked for manufacturers of construction product, dimension stone, architectural precast concrete, commercial casework. And so now I get into the construction side, and we're actually fabricating. So I've always had one foot firmly planted in both worlds, which can be a challenge, but it's kind of familiar getting in construction. I like getting back, the prefabrication and manufacturing aspect. It's good to get back into that. So from a construction perspective, we're in the MEP space. If it's hot, cold, or cold in a building, it's our competitor's fault. So we'll come in and fix it for you. Plumbing, piping, and sheet metal is what we do.
Excellent. All right, cool. And how long have you been with this group, and what's your specific role for UMC?
Just over 2 years. I've known some of the folks up here for a long time. This is a pretty tight-knit industry. Everybody knows everybody or has worked for everybody at some point. So I've been here a couple of years. How to best describe my role? I don't know, director of construction technology. It seems like that's the least thing I do. I focus an awful lot more on fabrication, or manufacturing. These last couple of years, my head's been around supply chain and logistics, just internally, not not availability in the market, but how do we track the materials coming in and distribute them to our shops and our job sites and things like that. So if general, some days you kind of feel like a janitor with a mop and a bucket. You're firefighting, cleaning up messes. You be strategic where you've got time, tactical, where required, and it's a juggling act. So
Just it sounds like so many construction professionals description that I work. At the end of the day, it's kind of, this is my title / whatever the hell it takes to get the job done. And so it sounds like you're in about the same boat there. Stacy, Stacy does an awesome job finding people to be a part of our show, and I think when Stacy found Darren, I think the reason that we brought Darren on the show, correct me if I'm wrong, Stacy, is just that his expert content and his posts that he was putting out on LinkedIn in relation to just kind of facing reality with BDC, which is maybe it's a really nice way of saying Darren puts his foot in his mouth in public, and we like that.
Yeah.
I am the self-proclaimed director of devil's advocacy.
I love that.
Well, and so let's for a moment, let's just define VDC for our audience. Let's orient them to that sort of world. So yeah, and not everybody's even if they're a contractor, may not be in a space where they're experiencing a lot of VDC BIM based projects. So describe, if we can, Darren, briefly what VDC is.
The acronym just stands for Virtual Design and Construction. We've all heard the term BIM for well over a decade, and some people think BIM equals Revit. Some people think it's a process. Some think it's more of a philosophy. It's many things to many people. I think the VDC is probably a more broad term that more probably accurately describes what we're trying to do, and we're trying to take all the digital information and build a project virtually. Doesn't necessarily save time, or hours necessarily, but it shifts them from the field into the office where there's a lot less risk. And so a lot of it's about mitigating risk. It takes longer to measure twice than measure once, but it's way more costly to cut twice. So that's why we, again, from a lean perspective, which comes from my manufacturing days, you want to be efficient and you shouldn't put waste, but there is no perfect system. So VDC is kind of that measure twice, so that we can cut once.
I love it. And I really appreciate the candor as it relates to the actual time savings. It's kind of like, may not actually save any time from start to finish in the project, but it's tearing something out virtually is much less expensive than tearing something out physically.
Virtual rework. And
virtual
in fact, a lot of
rework.
people, you typically do physical rework on your own dime. Virtual rework, a little secret in the industry, is quite often we get paid for it because people don't notice.
Right.
But it's it's a lot less costly than physical product.
Yeah.
And physical labor.
No doubt. So all right. So we're going to have a conversation about exactly where VDC does fit, maybe should fit, and basically just get all of your bold opinions on the topic, and maybe get into an argument or two, which could be fun. We will bring Stacy back with about 10 minutes to go so that we can channel any questions from the audience. But for the next 10 minutes, Darren, let's you and I get into this topic together. So,
sure.
All right. So I think the first question that I have is, there's so much happening around virtual design and construction. There's new hardware, there's new software, there's the flavor of the day in this space. But before we start looking at the newest shiny objects that are they're making their way into the industry, what are the foundations we need in place before we start looking at the latest and greatest?
I think you've got to have, again, all this digital technology requires data. If you don't have good data, accurate data, if your data's dirty, again, it's it's not going to really help. The tools just don't, a Band-Aid doesn't fix a cut. So you need to make sure you're healthy in terms of your data. The process as well, you need to have really great processes dialed in. What is your process? I think sometimes we just think the tools will take care of it for us. You need to have a, kind of a culture of continuous improvement. Just because you throw a tool at something doesn't mean that the process is dialed in or it's efficient or that it couldn't be more efficient. The other thing I think, and one of the great culture things I see in construction is people just get it done. At the end of the day, we build 100% of the building. There's no 80-20 rule. We build 100% of it, no matter the quality of the data or the processes or whatever the obstacles, we get it done. You move that in a digital world, people can get hung up on some things that really don't matter sometimes. So, well, I wasn't trained. It's like, well, then go train yourself. It'd be nice if somebody trained you, but I think you really need a culture of ownership too, where just, how can I improve the quality of somebody else's outcome, not just my own. When I talk to people in the industry, everyone knows what the problems are. And the common theme I hear all too often is it's somebody else should fix it. It's somebody else's problem. A lot of finger pointing as to where the problems are, what they are. But at the end of the day, one of the great cultures about construction is people just roll up their sleeves and get it done. Yeah. And I think more of that culture could get pulled into the office and into the virtual environment.
I agree with that sentiment. I think a lot of that could get pulled into the design side as well. With the architects and engineers of our industry. So what I'm hearing you say there is fundamentally accurate data, strong processes, and a culture that's actually going to embrace and own the new technology that we choose to adopt, because we can throw technology at a problem, but if we have bad data and bad processes, the technology is not going to solve it. And we can get really excited about the new shiny object, but if we don't have a discipline of saying, all right, now how are we going to make sure that we actually use this thing and optimize its potential? Then we're wasting our time and money there as well. So it's really funny. I was with a company probably a month ago that was really struggling to get accurate job costing nailed. It was like, we can't really hammer this down. We know that we've got 5 or 10% of slop, and we're trying to sort through it. And what we really need is this new accounting software. And I was like, I don't disagree that your accounting software is antiquated and there's lots of opportunity for improvement. But I think what you really need is to figure out why you can't get accurate accounting information, because I think you have too many cost codes.
Oh, yes.
And I think your people are not trained on, where to apply those things. And I think if they had both of those things, they'd be filtering that information into your crappy accounting system, and you'd know what your job costs were. So why don't you sort that out while you shop? And because it's, shopping isn't going to solve your lack of training and the fact that you have, probably 50% more cost codes than you need.
That's a very familiar. If you've got that many cost codes, people are just not going to use them, and they're going to dump their time somewhere else. Yep. The people in the field are going to be efficient no matter what you try. And so if you talk to some really seasoned data professionals, they're like, hey, stop trying to drill into the granular data. Let's step back. It's like, okay, so just overall, did we estimate how many feet of carbon steel pipe did we estimate? How much did we actually buy and install? Let's just start there. Let's look at the whole building. Can we get that right? And then start dialing it in. If you start trying to get into the granular bits and pieces right away, that's one reason, technology is like tracking, status tracking of material, is very difficult. The technology is really simple. What do you want to track? I mean, if every time you turn around, you're barcoding something, you're not actually building anything. So we've got to find kind of creative ways that this stuff happens more automatic, as just a natural organic output of our work. But I mean, if you need a cost code for reporting, that's a work activity then.
Agreed. Yeah. So, all right. Okay. Next question is, what are some of the, I don't know what a better word for this is, but maybe some of the misconceptions about virtual design and construction. When people get this image in their mind, you've been around this for, quite a while. What do you think they misunderstand, overstate, understate? Where do you think we get it wrong?
Oh, everywhere.
Right? as,
uh,
as we've established, you think there are
yeah.
a lot of problems there.
Yeah, it's some of it's just there's inherent conflict in business needs between different stakeholders. So one of the big misconceptions I see, everyone thinks it's going to save time, and it doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
save time. It shifts it from the field into the office where it's a lot less costly. You know, the you know from a lean manufacturing perspective, you don't want to do excess work and movement. So but we've all heard the measure twice, cut once.
Right.
Measuring twice is twice as costly as measuring once. Cutting twice is twice as costly as cutting once. What's more costly, cutting an extra cut or an extra measure? So we opt for those extra inefficiencies, so they shift them in the office.
Yeah, but what about when we don't have time to measure twice, on a project, right? Like, isn't that a reality? Isn't it? Aren't is it? Is there not such a thing as projects that you just can't go through this process?
Yeah, that does happen. Schedule is probably one of the biggest hurdles I think you see is just I guarantee there's not a I'd love to talk to any builder contractor that says there's enough time in the schedule to actually think. I hear the same thing for design
Okay.
professionals. We don't have time for great design. We do the best we can in the time we're allocated.
Right.
And so, I mean, you qualify based on value, you win the bid based on cost, and after that everything shifts into speed, and time to market is a big thing. So it's one of the things I see people more on the VDC side struggle with. I was at an industry event recently and we were talking about scanning, and he was talking about the use of laser scanners on a deck. And if you get if the rebar guys end up knocking a floor sleeve out of place, it's $2,000-3,000 to recore that concrete. And so we could just scan all that, process that, make sure everything's in place. And one of the gentlemen there represented a very large owner portfolio of data centers. He said, "How long would that take?" Well, we go out there and scan it and send the scans back in, and somebody's spend a day looking through that. And he's like, "You just cost me $1 million." So that, I mean, those are, yes, we could do more in VDC, but sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze, as they say. And I think I see a lot of the younger VDC professionals really struggling with kind of the business aspects of where should you do it. Yes, you could, but there's other bigger values.
Where so I'm gonna toss this for instance at you. Where should we definitely do it, and where should we maybe not? What are the situations when you think modeling is a no-brainer? We really need to be doing that, and maybe some of the instances where modeling is just the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
The larger projects obviously is where we do it. When people ask what percentage of your jobs are VDC, or have a BIM requirement, and I say like 5, and that shocks them. And it's like, well, hang on, we do a couple thousand special projects a year. Those things are, some of them last a day or two. Who has time to VDC that? Now we do almost 100% of our major projects, or that's where the bulk of the dollars are. So it depends on the size of the project.
Right? Are we talking about percentage of total projects? That's 5%. We're talking about percentage of revenue. That may be a much larger number, because when we look at the large projects, 100% of those are VDC projects.
Yeah, anything you're going to want to prefab or modularize or turn into a manufactured product, you're going to want to go into. Again, I've even seen prefabrication take longer and cost more, but there's only so many people getting a job site. I can't scale a job site. I can scale shops. I can put on a night shift. I can bring on another shop, things like that. So you start doing that stuff. You need to pre-plan, and that VDC is really pre-planning the product you're going to build.
Yeah, and I want to pounce for a second on that term that you just used, scale, because I think it's so important to, frankly, to business. It's an important concept in business, and it may be something that our audience could use a little bit of, fundamental understanding of. When you said you can't scale the field, but I can scale the shop, what did you mean by that?
Uh, this is a pretty volatile industry. Literally within in a week, you could go from overtime to layoffs back to overtime. So when you have a very fast track project,
Mm.
there's only so many people fit on the job site. There's only so many cranes you can put up. And so,
Meaning the
you,
job site is finite, right?
yeah,
The site itself it's a finite space. There's going to be a certain number of humans that can even fit in that space. Furthermore, there's probably only a certain number of humans that are qualified to do the work in that space and that have the safety requirements and all that kind of stuff, right? So we have
it's,
a very limited capability to work in the field. Is
yeah,
that's what you're saying?
yeah, I can add more square footage in my shop. I can reconfigure my shop. Maybe more, hey, we don't do a lot of racks maybe. So, but this next project, we're going to do a lot of racking. So maybe I do a temporary reconfigure of my shop to build more of a flow for racks, or, it's pretty common in our area, some of our piping suppliers, whether it's, Puget Sound Pipe or Ferguson, you know, our contractors will actually use their space, for staging materials, assembling, cutting. We could bring on another warehouse.
So we can literally expand our footprint in the shop,
Yep.
much more so than we can do in the field. Furthermore, then you also talk about adding shifts, right? We could run 3 shifts. We could literally run a 24-hour shop operation for a period of time on a fast track project to meet demand. All of these things, and I'll move on, but all of these things are just an example, that Darren's bringing up of scale. And when it comes to meeting a demand, scale is essentially just how much you can replicate what you are doing in the same amount of time.
Yes,
Right.
some of that too, I would even lump in like production smoothing. There's surges in work in a construction project, and so if you can get things decided early and dialed in, you can start fabricating early, so you can production smooth. That's harder to do at the job site. You could do it in a shop environment. You can start storing assemblies. So that when things really ramp up, you've already got it built, and you're just assembling at that point. You're not actually building anymore.
Awesome. All right. So what are some examples where modeling just doesn't make sense?
You know, Service work, in our industry, in our, MEP service work, special projects, a lot of that smaller scale work is just, I'm going to go in, I'm going to pop my head up above the ceiling tile. I'm going to see what's there. Got to communicate back to somebody. And, we're going to actually tear this out and rebuild it in 3 days. So, day 1, I'm looking to see what's there. Day 2, we actually build it. And day 3, we install it. I don't have another day to put VDC in there. By the time I explained it to the VDC guy and then review what they've done, I've already explained it to the shop and they're already building it. So that's probably one of the biggest issues I have with some of the people in my particular craft is just, everything should be modeled. Really? Everything? Do you have a 3D model? How many drywall screws are in there? Did you actually model those? I mean, there gets to be a diminishing return sometimes on that type of stuff, and some of it's just really project specific. I think the hardest thing for me to wrap around is the the construction schedule being ahead of the design schedule. How can that be? Happens all the time if you talk to people, and so those make it a little bit harder sometimes. To do that stuff, it really depends on the project, the team, the dynamics, the schedule, the owner. If you've got a developer doing a shell and core and, you got a different contractor doing the TI, it's probably not going to be as efficient from a VDC construction perspective, but each owner's getting what they want out of the project. The developer wants to take his money and run and turn it over to the tenant. So they're going to demobilize their crane, even though the TI could really use a crane to install some of the equipment and materials. So it's just the business sometimes does not lead for our owner's business and value drivers sometimes don't lead to efficiency, in our side. Sometimes the biggest value we can provide is actually to absorb that those volatile natures of our customers' business for them, and just make it easy for them. Makes our job hard, but
Right, right, right. Well, that's part of it. I'm going to bring Stacy back here because I know that we're going to have a handful of questions before we wrap up from the audience. But one of the things that I guess I want to clarify is that, my and argue with me, Darren. But my opinion on this is that the projects where it doesn't currently make sense for one reason or another to get into modeling, that landscape is changing all the time. That the easier it becomes, that the faster it is to measure twice, that you know what I mean, the
yeah,
more automated those processes become, the more of a no-brainer it is to go ahead and model the building. And I think my biggest fear is that we don't get the word out about those things, and that people miss out on really common sense opportunities that would add very little cost, very little time, and have a huge return on investment. What's your perspective on that?
that. I think that's accurate. When you get into VDC, and it's going to be more costly when you start. One of the things I tell people is just, what's more efficient, a shovel or a backhoe? And everyone's thinking a backhoe. No, it's
Right.
a shovel. You know why? I don't know how to use a backhoe.
Right.
So throw me in there and I don't know what to do. Now, what's the right answer? The backhoe. So I'm not going to be efficient initially, probably not going to be as safe. It's going to
Yep.
take a while, but that's the right answer. So you can't look at it just from a perspective of time and money. And like I said, it's one of those things that, the right team, you learn, you get more proficient with the tools, and you're not going to do that by just, looking again. You don't run a business from a spreadsheet. There's a lot of gut feel for it, and you just kind of know what the right decisions are, even sometimes when they don't make sense on paper.
Well, we appreciate this dialogue about, I guess the real world experience from an MEP, or from a mechanical contractor, that is, in applying this stuff on a daily basis. I'm gonna ask one quick question. I saw it in the chat, and it was actually, on my list as well. So I'll ask it, which is, for your business in your company, what's the technology that you're currently using? What software packages are you currently using?
Well, everyone's going into Revit. It's more of a project requirement. So, Revit quite a bit. That's just about every VDC, BIM requirement is going to be in Revit. Now we use Autodesk Fabrication, for drawing the piping and plumbing. The other big competitor in that space is Trimble's Siskiyou product. That tends to be a pretty hot button topic in our little niche industry. And honestly, both are great products, and either one would work, depending on the environment. I try not to get too caught up on the name brand type stuff. It's just what works. I mean, and I won't name other packages. There's some packages I've probably picked the lesser of the packages when I decide what to deploy, because culturally it fit better, or it was easier to incrementally adopt. Even though the better product was, something I was interested in, is just it had a harder adoption curve. So it's really, like I said, the Navis, the Revits, it's all pretty standard stuff, our industry. So
just, putting it out there, because I know that our audience, particularly our live audience right now, is chomping at the bit to sort of know, when you talk about your world, what software are you using? So that's your tech stack. Got it.
Yeah, there's a lot more. We're doing more manufacturing. So SolidWorks, Inventor, I'd like to see a lot more of that than we're doing. The typical cloud stuff, Autodesk BIM 360, some Trimble Viewpoint teams. This is the hard part about a mechanical contractor. If the GC is on Procore, we're going to be using some Procore. If the GC is on BIMTrack, we're going to be using some BIMTrack. It's really hard to have an enterprise product, in your own company, when you're kind of, having to, to meet the customer where they're at. I was at a company once, and we had like over 20 different products we use to actually collaborate and share files between contractors.
Oh my God.
From FTP sites to Google Docs. It's crazy.
That sounds like the opposite of lean.
Yeah.
All right, Stacy, we probably have time for one or two questions here from the audience.
With sorry, with that being said, should we track things that we can't control?
Absolutely. Probably my biggest disagreement with people in the MEP space. Like it comes to coordination, we have no control. It's really up to the GC. If they can't manage coordination efficiently, it is what it is. And so there's a lot of things you can't control, but you can influence, and you can influence without data or knowledge to share that. And so I always hear people talk about the engineers never know. We always get poor engineering drawings. Have we ever explained to the engineer what we care about, what we don't? Has the engineer ever explained that to the architect? That goes all over the place. We've heard that before. That in professional realms, we tell people that you don't actually have to have employees working under you to influence them. But you can, you have to manage them to influence them and help lead them. Same thing with construction. We should be tracking more things so that when the general contractor asks us to do something that we think is not wise, we can say, yes, we can do that. Here's the impact. And without that data, you're just going to be taking their decision and running with it the best you can. I see a lot of people, we can't control that, so it doesn't pay. I do think it pays, but it's more of a long game.
So someone who's dedicated to doing things in a virtual environment, what would you say is important when working together in person? Like, why is that important, and how can you achieve that?
Oh, another hot button topic for me. Work from home, I think, is bad in a lot of ways. I talked to a BIM leader at one of the companies I worked at. They had multiple offices out on the East Coast, and she's like, "God, this team out there in Baltimore, pretty rogue." It's like, "When's the last time you were out there?" It's like, "Well, I've never been there. You got to go there." And then I explained, I'll go there and I will have a 2-hour conversation with somebody who will never call and never email. Being physically present, you get to know people. Hang out. You want to find out what really happens at a company? Go hang out with the guys in the back of the shop when they're having their smoke break. You'll find out what really happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I can give several examples of where, I showed up to have an in-person conversation to say no to somebody who asked for something that seemed very simple and obvious, but I had a reason. I wanted to do that in person. It was more personal. And that's led to a whole series of things. And hey, long as you're here, come see this. And we made a big process improvement in VDC, not even related to what I went into the office for that day, just because it was a chain reaction. You got to be present, management while walking around. Now you can do things. I can support people very good remotely. I've been the first call on the West Coast when the shop goes down at 5 a.m. on the East Coast. Because I work graveyard shift. I know what that's like. I'm happy to support them. But they felt comfortable calling me when it was important. And I knew what to do because I actually have been there and I've met them. I've had lunch with them. We've been through the battle together. So I just culturally, there's some things you just can't do. People will talk to you in person that will never call you. Oh, they're busy. I don't want to bother them, or I don't have time to type up that email. But if they see you, hey, as long as you're here, hey, come look at this. If you're gonna virtually design a product to get installed in the field, how are you gonna do that without seeing how the shop actually builds it?
Yeah,
it's a fascinating topic, and it's one of those things that I agree. We're all trying to sort out in a newly virtual world where people are really en masse used to operating virtually more so, but it's that we've lost a lot, man. And there's a I I think and I'm glad that I operate in construction where the vast majority of my clients are in person and
It's
haven't experienced a lot of the mess that I think some of the rest of the economy has experienced.
it's a very social industry and business. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we see, you got all the tech prognosticators and the vendors and who are collaboration platform. And I called somebody out on this on LinkedIn. They commented about digital communication. It's like, no, people don't digitally communicate. They message. Imagine with your wife and your kids, never talking to them. You just communicate through Post-it notes, but you never speak. That's what email is. It's messaging. All these platforms about statuses and alerts and task trackers, that's messaging.
True.
Communication is me and you, maybe a second person, a third
Right.
person. And so people have been, especially the work with home has made it worse. We've convinced ourselves that all of these digital platforms are communication vehicles, and they're not. They're messaging vehicles and tracking vehicles and status vehicles. And those are all good things, but they don't replace getting on the phone.
Says a person who is literally building buildings in a virtual environment. Quote, get back together in person. It's necessary. So
I
that's
did.
good, man.
I learned this from a president of a company I worked with back in manufacturing. He had a theology degree of all things. And he said, you're driving by the road, you see somebody broke down, and it's your best friend.
Mm-hmm.
You stop and help them? Yeah. What if it's a stranger? So you want people to be your friends. And so he had this rule of thumb. Are you in the same building? Go talk to them. Yes, it'll take longer, but you got to build that personal relationship. Fall back on a phone call. Third should be email or message, text messages. But, someday you're going to screw something up, and the only person who's going to help you out is another guy you're going to destroy their world, for them to try to help you. You want them to be your friend, and you can't do that as easily virtually as if you met them in person.
Totally. So. Yeah. It's I oftentimes use the analogy of, like, imagine treating people in an elevator the way that you treat them while you're driving down the road. Like the same, would you get out of my way and, slam it, giving everybody the finger, there's something that when we are face to face sharing the same air, that it does make a huge impact.
One of the biggest examples I can think of is I know a plumbing detailer and his project manager hated each other, literally hated each other, would avoid each other. Company had a cornhole tournament to kind of build team building, and you had to be paired up with somebody who was not in your department.
Right.
Those two got paired up. They got to know each other outside of a work, professional environment, got to be friends, and they worked better together after that. Now they could work after that. They could work virtually together, but that physical presence broke down a lot of barriers for those two people.
Awesome.
So
great stuff. Well, Darren, this was we'll end it there. Great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. A wide and a conversation with a lot of variety. So appreciate your joining and sharing your perspectives. It's also been nice to watch the sunrise in your background.
Right?
A little bit of cloudy. It'll vary throughout the day.
Yeah, it's all good. It's there will be light. All right. Darren, any parting words before we wrap up?
Oh, keep chipping away at it. That's all. You'll never be done. If I accomplish 10% of the things that I think should happen, it'll be a huge success. There's just, there's so much to do and not enough time to do it all.
Yeah. Mindset of progress and progress, not perfection, right?
And then, I guess lastly, I'll steal something a good friend of mine mentioned. He said, if you're still running payroll off of spreadsheets, you got no business looking at robots. So just use that one the next time somebody talks about robots running around.
Thank you, Darren. We appreciate having you for your common sense and real world approach. We appreciate it. Stacy, let's talk a little bit about what we have coming up. And, I think first off, next week, same time, episode 48, we've got Jim Rogers, who's actually an employee of LinkedIn. Right. He's a part of the LinkedIn online training curriculum. So he runs construction specific training, and we're going to be talking to him about the variety of construction training that he puts on, but specific emphasis on their project management training modules. That'll be a really interesting conversation with Jim from LinkedIn Learning. And as always, email us to be added to our weekly mailing list. Make sure that you email Stacy h@steeltowecom.com. And as we get ready for our next season, which starts in the summer, we are loading up our calendar. every week, adding new people. If you or someone you know has an important story to tell about creating positive change in the building industry, please reach out to Stacy or I, and we will, engage that person and figure out how and if they fit into to what we're trying to accomplish in the next season. Other than that, I think we can wrap it up. Stacy, any other comments or questions?
Nope, you covered it all. We're good to go. And we'll see you guys next week.
Can't wait. See you soon. Stacy, enjoy.
Thank you. See ya.
See ya.